Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
The state's fiscal outlook grows dimmer with each new forecast. The legislative analyst is now projecting a $20.7 billion gap in next year's budget. A group of students take over Wheeler Hall on the Berkeley campus following yesterday's vote by the UC Regents for a 32% tuition hike. And Wells Fargo has agreed to pay back $1.4 billion to investors. $700 million will come to California to settle a lawsuit filed by Attorney General Jerry Brown. And the story of a Filipino boxer who's energized Bay Area plans and become a global role model. That's coming up next. Hello, I'm Belva Davis. Welcome to This Week in Northern California. First, a recap of some headlines from the news this week. California is first in the nation to pass energy efficiency standards for new televisions sold in the state. Sets less than 58 inches will be required to reduce electric consumption 33% by 2011 and 40% by 2013. Consumers are projected to save $8.1 billion on their electricity bills over the first 10 years. Other states are expected to follow suit. A controversial proposal to install surveillance cameras to record the license plates of all vehicles coming in and going out of the Marin town of Tiburon was passed unanimously by the town council this week. The hope is to deter thefts committed by non-residents. Those who oppose the recording say that it is a violation of privacy. This week, commercial crab season got off to an uncertain start early. The Dungeness crab numbers were expected to be low in Bay Area waters, but the local fishermen say it's been better than expected, so far anyway. A report released this week by the UC Davis Graduate School of Management found that women still struggle to break through the glass ceiling in California business. There is one woman for every 9 men in high-level executive positions in the 400 top public companies in the state. San Francisco was the exception where women fared better. Joining me now on our news panel, Mark Calvi, reporter for the San Francisco Business Times. Stu Wu, reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and Nanette Asimov, staff writer for the San Francisco Chronicle. Nanette, you are just back from Berkeley's Wheeler Hall, where there's been a lot of action. Before that, you were down in Los Angeles, where the Regents voted. But what happened here in our area today?
Well, there was a day-long takeover of the English department, which is known as Wheeler Hall on the Cal campus, and students, I would say some 2,000 of them, ringing that building in protest, often in the pouring rain today, and shouting their opposition to this tremendous fee increase that was just approved by the UC Regents in Los Angeles yesterday. So there was a lot of anger on campus today, and the sense of power that the students felt that they needed to take over this building, and it culminated in the arrest of 40 students, you know, as dusk fell and they were led away.
What angered them, of course, was the fee hike. So explain that a little bit.
Well, it started out with the fee hike. Of course, the students inside had other demands. They wanted layoffs reinstated of custodians and things like that. But this is a fee hike that is that takes the cost of a UC education over $10,000 for the first time. It's a 32% fee increase that will increase 15% in January and then a total of 32% next fall. And students are absolutely livid about this. They cite the master plan, which California's master plan for higher education promises a free education from public universities in California. But even UC President Mark Yudof said that the California Higher Education Master Plan is in tatters. Those are the words that he used.
Annette, how do the low-income students handle such a huge increase?
Well, yeah, it's such an interesting question because a lot of these protests are students saying, we will not be able to continue our education. We're too low income and we're going to have to drop out. But there's a program called the Blue and Gold, which says that any student whose family makes less than $70,000 a year will pay nothing in tuition. And one of the major issues at the Regents meeting was how the Regents said that they had done a horrible job in explaining this financial aid to the students. Their education will be free except for living expenses, but these low-income students are not going to have to quit school, and the university really wants the students to know this, and they chastise themselves for not making that clearer.
Have there been talks of alternatives to a fee hike to close the shortfall in the UC budget?
Well, there's a lot of hand-wringing, and then every time Mark Yudof says, we just have no more money, John Garameni or somebody else comes up and says, what about this oil severance tax, which would create, this being talked about in the legislature now, and would create a dedicated funding stream just for higher education, CSU, UC, community colleges. But when Assembly Speaker Karen Bass, who is a regent, she said, do I have your support for getting this passed? There was lukewarm support from UC and CSU. And that is because they have quibbles with this particular bill. But evidently, a oil severance tax would solve a lot of the financial problems that the universities are having right now. It's just that the chance of getting that passed is almost nil.
What is the size of UC's budget, and how much money would such a tax bring in anyway? Would it make a dent?
Yeah, it would. It would bring in over $1 billion, they say. Now, the UC budget is so interesting because it's $19 billion, but only about $2.5 billion comes from the state. That was $3 billion, but the state has reduced its support, which is what is causing this whole problem. The anger of the students is, why can't you take from all that other pool of money and give it to us? And that way you won't have to lay off faculty and raise our fees. And Mark Yudof and the regents say that that is dedicated money. It's not money that they can just dip into. They need to maintain the quality of the university and attract the Nobel laureates that they have and pay them what they pay them. And so it is really, they say, a question of getting the state to increase funding for higher education.
And are there any talks of things like what we heard before, in disbanding athletics there? I mean, are there other pools of money that have not been closely looked at?
I think the news is mainly bad. Mark Yudof and also Chancellor Reed from CSU are each planning to go to the state, hat in hand, and say, you know, give us $800 million, give us $900 million, reinstate this, but it's not going to happen. There's not any plan to make changes on the UC budget with athletics or anything. It's just supposed to come from the state, and the state says it's not forthcoming.
Well, has the governor spoken out on this? Has anybody from the legislature spoken out about this at all?
Not at present, because they're still at the very beginning of their budget process. And so when I called the Department of Finance, they said we're going to have more budget information in December, and we're not really ready to say just exactly what we may or may not be willing to give higher education just yet, but from all indications, there's not a lot to give.
Well, Stu, that leads us directly to your story, and that is we use the word grim and dim now when we talk about financial projections for the state. And of course, nothing, I guess, can happen for UC without help from state finances.
Right. To no one's surprise this week, the Legislative Analyst's Office released a report saying that the state, after closing cumulative $77 billion shortfall already over the past 2 fiscal years, they're facing another $20 billion for the next 19 months. And it gets even worse in the long term. Until the year 2015, we're going to be facing an annual $20 billion deficit. What that means for the short term is that there's going to be more cuts, possibly to higher education. There's going to be more cuts to possibly to spending to social programs. And there's also the possibility that we might see our taxes go up again. That's one problem. The second problem is that it puts a lot of pressure on California's cash reserves right now. Controller John Chung said that maybe as soon as this spring, we might have trouble paying our bills. That might mean another round of IOUs, which means another, several billions of dollars that might not go into the economy, and that might further hamper our recovery from this recession.
We seem to be in this spiral. Any body of people addressing this?
The Democrats and Republicans can't agree on how to solve these seemingly perennial deficits. The only thing they can agree on is that we have to increase our revenue base somehow, and that means encouraging job growth. And but what policies will do that? That's also a point of contention up in Sacramento.
What are the chances that this 2/3 requirement for raising taxes, raising more revenue, will be addressed or changed, or is that a fixed in stone?
Democrats, every time there's a budget problem, Democrats have always brought up the problem that the 2/3 majority requirement to pass a budget is hampering the state's ability to stop the deficit. But there was a recent poll from the Public Policy Institute of California that says that Californians are a bit wary of changing that, and they think it's a good thing to have a minority party have some say in deciding what our budget will be.
How are bondholders reacting to all this news? Are they nervous? How will investors be more reluctant to help finance the state's operations?
Well, anytime the state says that, hey, we might have trouble paying our bills, that's cause to worry. But the state treasurer's office has been very adamant about saying California has never defaulted on its payments, and if its credit rating could go down if it has to issue IOUs again. But that might actually present an opportunity to investors, which might get a higher yield on those bonds.
Leadership from the governor's office or from the speaker's office or any of those people who are out ahead of the band here on supposedly trying to solve this problem?
The governor says he's against. There's been so much disagreement. The one thing that we can expect when the governor releases his budget in January is that there will probably be no proposal to raise taxes. He says Californians are through with tax increases. We're going to do this by cutting.
But faced with closing parks, making university not available to many students, what are they basing this on that Californians don't want?
What is left to cut?
Right. Yeah, the Democrats are saying we're already cut to the bone. The safety net has been eliminated for millions of Californians already. But I think the governor is basing this on the results of the May 19 poll. There's a ballot measure that would have increased taxes or extended a tax increase for the next 2 years. And Californians soundly rejected that I think by 60%. So it's in his opinion that the state doesn't need any more taxes right now.
What about from some of the candidates who are running for governor? Anything creative coming from them? So how do we get through this period?
Mm-hmm. The Republicans are saying, Meg Whitman for one is saying that we need to eliminate the size of the state public, eliminate jobs in state government. She thinks that'll save some money. Steve Poizner, another Republican, thinks that we need to cut spending reduce taxes by 10%. He thinks that will stimulate enough job growth to help cover the deficit. Tom Campbell thinks that we do need to raise some taxes. One tax would be the gas tax, and that would go directly to help fund public education. But he also thinks that spending needs to be pared down. Jerry Brown hasn't said much about his plans. Gavin Newsom, when he was running for governor, said that he thought the legislature should have considered some of the tax proposals, such as adding a tax on alcohol or tobacco.
Mm-hmm. So furloughs will continue at least into next year, and then find out what the next step is?
It's interesting. The analyst report that was released this week doesn't factor in furloughs continuing, but it looks as if the governor and the legislature are going to have to look at that if they want to cut spending.
Okay. None of that is good news at all coming from the state. Certainly does not encourage the regions to have confidence that they're going to get relief.
They call the state an unreliable partner.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Stu. Well, Mark Calvi, first now I want you to explain to me in the Wells Fargo story and this big payback to investors, what kinds of investment instruments are we talking about?
It has the arcane name of auction rate securities, but essentially allowed hospitals, companies, other bond issuers to pay lower short-term rates on long-term borrowing by frequently auctioning off the debt over and over, sometimes as frequently as a week. This was attractive to investors because they felt they could get their money out at any time over the course of the week, and it gave them higher rates than they could earn maybe on treasuries. Unfortunately, the market froze in February of 2008, and so it was a classic case of if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And Wells Fargo investors, along with the rest of the industry, this was an industry-wide product, they could not get their money out. Some sold at a loss. I know of people like you and I losing 10% of their investment on what they thought was as safe as cash in the bank. And so this is Wells 18 months later saying, okay, we're going to buy these securities back from investors based on the litigation with the State Attorney General Jerry Brown, and half that money does go to Californians.
Mm-hmm. So is this something that was prevalent throughout the banking industry?
It certainly was. It was extremely popular because it looked like a win-win situation. But once Wall Street and investors realized once again that risk is a four-letter word, they didn't want to participate in the auctions, they failed. So it did not allow for the automatic refinancing of this debt.
So Mark, who are some of these investors? I mean, are they real people like you and me, or who are they?
Well, they certainly are. In fact, I think a lot of people were surprised they were even in auction rate securities. They thought they were just in an account that was paying a little bit better than they could get elsewhere. And so you had charities, individuals, nonprofits losing money, and it was quite a shock. When you're looking at having money in the bank or in a money market account, you're expecting you can pull it out at any time you may need it. And when they lost that ability, some felt the pain.
And can you put this in context of the greater financial crisis? Is this part of it, or will it exacerbate it?
It's a good point, because even though $60 billion in these securities has been repurchased through some of these settlements like Wells and others have done, the bigger issue in the banking, this is kind of a sideshow. The bigger issue coming down the pike is commercial real estate. They think it might be a redo of the mortgage problems in the residential side. And I sat down with the Mechanics Bank CEO Steve Buster yesterday. On the upside, he said, we're definitely in recovery. The recession is over, but it's going to be a slow and painful recovery. And he actually sees a 40% increase in the rate of unemployment, hitting as high as 14%. That's not good news. For the unemployed, their bankers, or the state of California and their tax collections.
Is it possible to have recovery and still have nearly 15% unemployment?
Well, I think a lot of people are having trouble getting their mind around that idea. Even if the GDP is growing, even if it does feel like technically we're out of a recession, it doesn't feel like that on Main Street. And I can assure you, Steve Buster was quick to say, I can change my mind if something unforeseen happens. So I think he's giving himself a little bit of an out there wisely.
We also heard from Schwab that they did not embrace the settlement that Jerry Brown worked out.
People are watching Schwab nationally because they're digging in their heels and saying, we're a different animal. We didn't underwrite these securities like a Citigroup or others have done. Plus, we deal with self-directed investors. We were processing orders put in by our clients, so we should not have to make up this loss that they've experienced. It's like if they had bought Google and it went down, should we have to make up for the losses they experienced in a Google investment? So I think all eyes are on Schwab to see how does this develop and unfold as they deal with this whole issue of auction rate securities.
Will we hear, well, I don't know whether we will or not, hear more outcomes that are this good for investors in the future, do you think?
I'm not optimistic. This is reportedly the largest buyback in making investors whole. And I think it was a unique situation. There are, I think, a lot of investors out there still nursing their wounds, and they only wish they could get this type of buyback that Wells Fargo, Citi, and others have agreed to do.
Is this a problem that Wells inherited in all of the mergers and acquisitions that went on back during the height of the banking crisis?
In many respects, they bought Wachovia. Wachovia in the summer of '08 had signed a letter of intent of how they had planned to resolve auction rate securities. Weeks later, they had trouble keeping their doors open when they ran into their own troubles, so Wells bought them at the end of the last year. So they've kind of picked up Wachovia's issues on this matter. They had their own, and I think what they're trying to do is put out this fire. Let's resolve that matter, because they're getting high marks on the Wachovia integration, but they have a full plate. This takes one thing off the plate for them.
Was the federal government involved in this at all, or was this just done by people like Jerry Brown, Attorney General here?
The Attorney Generals at the state level are the ones that are really taking a lot of action. In fact, Schwab is responding to the New York Attorney General's office investigating the matter. So once again, we're seeing a lot of action within the state Attorney Generals dealing with this issue.
Okay, and we must say that Wells did not admit to doing anything
that is correct,
wrong,
absolutely.
that these were just circumstances that had to be
yes.
settled. Is that right?
No admitting of wrongdoing.
Okay. Well, thanks to you, Mark. At least some investors are a bit happier today.
Oh, yes.
And in about 90 days or so, they might see some
Yeah,
money.
it's going to be quick, yes.
Okay. Well, thanks to you, Mark. Thanks to you, Stu, and thanks to you, Nanette. Well, fighting your way out of poverty is a common story, but our next story is about physically fighting your way out. Odette Keeley with New American Media joins me now to talk about the Filipino people's champ, Manny Pacquiao, who is winning more than boxing competitions. Welcome, Odette. As you know, we don't usually talk about boxing on this program, so this must be a very special and a very unique individual. So first of all, tell me what makes him different from a boxer.
Absolutely, Belva. As you said, he's winning the hearts and minds of not only Filipinos in the store, in the video clips we're going to see later on when we cover this in a Bay Area Filipino restaurant. It was a wildly diverse crowd, wildly engaged crowd. You had an African entrepreneur, Indonesian high-tech worker, and even Latinos are getting into his corner, which is really amazing. I do want to say one thing, Belva, and what we discovered, the reason why I'm here talking about this story here on your show and why our ethnic media partners, New American Media, the mainstream media has been all over, from ESPN to Time Magazine, is because this has gone beyond the ring. This is now round 13, as we say. This is now not just a sports story, but even beyond Manny Pacquiao, it's become a story of communities that are galvanizing around their heroes. And, you know, even in the Spanish language press, members of our network, you have Impremedia, which is publisher of some of the biggest Spanish language networks and newspapers in the country. They had a dedicated interactive website. They had running blogs. You know, they were talking about this fight. You had the Puerto Rican newspaper Primera Hora talking about the support of the Puerto Ricans and, of course, the inevitable disappointment at his defeat. And now let's go to this match, this firepower match. Filipino fighter, legend Manny Pacquiao defeating Puerto Rican Miguel Cotto and taking away his WBO welterweight crown. What makes this so special, Belva? It's history-making. Manny Pacquiao has put himself in the boxing history books by becoming the first ever professional fighter to win 7 titles, 7 world titles in 7 different weight classes. And it's just this getting up there to the world boxing stage, Las Vegas being the fighting capital of the world, that has made him a demigod to the Filipinos, looking up to him, and is a blazing symbol of hope. And you saw that also with the Latino fighters, many of them he fought. You know, he defeated Oscar de la Hoya just last December, a celebrity boxer, put him into retirement, as many have said. He just defeated the UK champion, Ricky Hatton. So these victories have cemented his stature as the world's best boxer pound for pound.
Well, there are other things that also have made people really rush to his side and become his fans. But let's talk about the night that his last fight. It happened in Las Vegas, as these things do. And but you were here at a local place where Filipino community gathers. Tell me about being there for that.
Filipino and Philippine media flocked to Las Vegas. You had ABS-CBN News, Philippine News, sending their crew. Film Star, based in San Francisco, sent their crew. But it's a very curious and very strong dynamic. It's the second time I've covered it in a local Filipino restaurant.
Well, let's go to that night.
Let's go to that.
Relive that a little bit.
So in this match, you can see just the crowd. It's almost like a communal living room. You know, it's like watching a game with your friends and family. Every jab and punch of Manny Pacquiao, because overwhelmingly they were for him. You can hear the crowd yell, and you know, every time he gets hit, they wince. But at the same. And the roar of that crowd was deafening when referee Kenny Bayless had to stop the fight in the 12th round, 55 seconds into the 12th round, and just had to declare Manny Pacquiao the winner. You know, Puerto Rican Miguel Cotto's face was bloody and swollen, but he gave just this very gentleman-like, sportsman-like hug to Manny Pacquiao, the winner. And we were able to speak with, as I mentioned, a wildly diverse crowd, and they saw themselves in him. They saw themselves in this Filipino who had struggled from devastatingly poor background to just the highest heights, the pinnacle of wealth and success, and is going to continue that. You had this, you know, as I mentioned, some Latinos didn't feel that it was taking away from their Hispanic heritage to support him. So a Puerto Rican, African-American internet marketer said, you know, I'm torn. Cotto is Puerto Rican like me, but I just cannot help but admire Manny Pacquiao, this Filipino's incredible talent.
So why is this story important here? Is it because of what?
It has just shown how this Filipino fighter has crossed the boundaries. We saw a glimpse of how his fans have become multi-ethnic and global. You know, in the Philippines, the nation grinds to a halt. Zero crime happens. The rebels declare a ceasefire with the military, and every person in the nation is just glued to the TV screen, and that goes for the diaspora. Yeah. So he's crossed those boundaries, and the next big buzz is Manny Pacquiao and Mayweather, and so they say it's saving the boxing sport. So there's a large. How large is the Filipino community here? What we've said, 33,000 just in Daly City alone. So I know 50,000 more just in the San Francisco Bay Area. So is that large in terms of a concentrated population? And that's why we thought it was very apt to cover it in Daly City this time, because it is the highest population of Filipinos of any mid-sized city in North America. It's Manila Town, USA. And he also does other things with his resources and with the goodwill that he built up. Tell me a little bit about that. He's a multitasker. Right after this fight with Miguel Cotto, he went straight to the stage, from the boxing ring to the concert stage. He has 2 platinum albums in the Philippines. Many have said he should stick to your day job, Manny, but he's an actor, he has a sitcom. There are talks of a reality TV show here in the U.S., and now I've seen reports that he may run for Congress, and hasn't he also been helpful in sharing some of his wealth with folks back home? He's very generous, and that humility, you know, many have said it's such a huge burden, responsibility for one person to carry the weight of a whole nation on his shoulders, which he does, but he's embraced that with humility. The typhoon victims, you know, are looking forward to yet another round of aid from him, because this is what he did when he was training there, and as we know, 3 different typhoons ravaged the Philippines. Well, an unusual story. Good story on a night when the budget's falling apart. Thank you so much, Odette. Well, our next week's program we'll have a discussion on health care reform with our special guest, Congresswoman Anna Eshoo. We invite you to visit our website at kqed.org/thisweek, where you can watch complete episodes and segments, subscribe to our newsletter and podcast, and comment on our stories and share your thoughts on the question of the week. This week's question: how will higher tuition fees affect your family? In closing tonight, we remember Bay Area journalist Andrea Lewis. She was a longtime host on KPFA radio, a contributor to a number of media outlets, and often a guest on this program. Her warm smile, her deep voice, and passionate dedication to the issues she reported on will be missed. I'm Belva Davis. Good night.